Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the leading employee benefits and engagement platform.
When we think about workplace experience, workers want experiences that strive to energize them not only by satisfying their basic needs, but by providing opportunities for career advancement and expansion to look forward to. And that is where the concept of total rewards come in, and it includes all that an employee wants today rather than concentrating exclusively on compensation. Let's know more in today's episode. Hi everyone, this is Sushmita from Vantage HR Influencers Podcast, and today we'll be talking about total rewards and employee engagement. And for the same, we have with us guest speaker Charu Purohit. Charu has worked in the industry over 13 years, leading HR assignments in organizations like Aditya Birla Group, Abbott, and Tata. She has worked across South Asia, US, and Middle East, leading multiple projects. Some of her key assignments include large-scale mergers and acquisitions, business shutdowns, and organization restructuring. She recently stepped back from her corporate roles to follow her passion of mentoring and advising startups on HR. Welcome to the show, Charu.
Hi, Sushmita. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. So first, before we start with the topic, please let us know a brief about your journey in the corporate world.
So as you might be aware, I have spent about 13 years in HR, primarily focused on rewards and talent. I was very fortunate to work with organizations such as Tata Group, Abbott, and Aditya Birla. This has been a fantastic journey for me because it allowed me to work across geographies, including Southeast Asia, Middle East, and the US. And I've worked on some fairly challenging projects, setting up of greenfield plants, going to M&As, and business shutdown. So it has been a pretty interesting journey so far.
Okay. So, Charu, going by our topic today for our listeners, could you please explain what is total rewards and what is the total rewards approach and why is it so important for organizations today?
So let me break it down. So let me first address the first question. Before going into the details, if you just simply think about it, total rewards is just about the big picture. As an employer, I just start looking at what is it that my employees value most about working at my organization. Now, when you start drilling into it, this would be a combination of pay, benefits, learning opportunities, growth opportunities, wellness programs, and of course, recognition. So therefore, as an employer, I have to find an optimal mix of these levers and deliver a value proposition.
Right.
Now, why do I need to do that? It helps me look at it holistically and optimize my return on talent. So from my perspective as an employer, when I start talking to my probable employees or existing employees, I just don't talk about pay packages. I start talking about growths and opportunities, flexibility, and other schemes for development and continued education.
Right.
Now, this is one part of it, which when it comes to, talent attraction and retention. But most importantly, going back to the cultural aspect, I'm also building a culture of fairness, transparency, and clarity. So it signals to my employee that there is a genuine intent on my part to build a relationship with them. And hence, I find it very, very important.
Okay, right. So we also, talk a lot about employee engagement. So how is total rewards, or how are total rewards connected to employee engagement? What are your views on it?
Let's look at it a little differently. So now, as I spoke about it, that total rewards is about the big picture. So it's a sum total of financial and non-financial value proposition I have to offer to employees. And as a consultant, I love research. I usually use it as a starting point for all my further work and advice. If you go back to the research, whether it's from academic institutions like Harvard, etc., or from Aons and Hayes and Gallups of the world, they have found that the non-financial aspects of total rewards is very critical to employee engagement. The pay part of it is more of a hygiene factor. However, things like quality of work environment, career development, culture, work-life balance, probably the most important factor would be recognition. They all have a much greater impact on work engagement.
So, how do we figure out like what our workers or our employees, now depending on the generations, what they want? Especially if we talk about millennials, who is like almost like 70% of the working population now. So, how do we know that what our workers want from the employers?
It's a very important question to ask ourselves. Now, while I have great faith in research, research on subjects like millennials will probably tell you, that there are certain stereotypes, like they like challenging workplaces, they like flexibility to pursue certain things outside work, their personal passions, or being a better parent. They are socially and environmentally more conscious. I usually like to focus more on positives, so I talk about that. But what I'm trying to say is, while these generalizations are good to start with, they just make you end up more truth adjacent. So first, let's be humble and just start by saying we really do not know what our employees want. We just do not know. Once we start with that, then we try to find out. How do you find out? The simplest way is to ask them. So figure out, how do you want to ask this to your employees? One important thing, Sushmita, that has changed for this generation from the past is that we are really used to personalization in our lives.
Definitely.
Like, for example, at home, there's me and my husband and my daughter, and all three of us binge watch different series on Netflix. We don't watch same things at all.
Same thing, right.
Yeah, same is the case with music, with Spotify, etc. Again, when you go out to restaurants, one person wants vegan, the other wants gluten free, and we are all willing to pay for these experiences. So your employee is just not an employee, right? He or she is a person,
right?
And when they are used to personalization in their regular lives, how can they not expect it in their workplaces?
Exactly.
So when you ask them again, see if there's scope for personalization.
Okay. So it is basically like we need to ask them what they want, right?
Yes, it's very important to ask and personalize, not just bring them together as one segment and stick to that.
Yeah, but then again, it will also depend, upon each person's, wants and desires. So it may be like one person, whatever one person wants, the other may not in the same team. So is it possible that we give such personalized in such levels of personalization for the organizations?
You'll be surprised, actually. You could look at our good friend marketing. Technology has actually enabled personalization a lot. You may not be able to personalize each and everything, but you can find out little niches where you can do personalization. For example, recognition is one area where you could reward people with different things. One person may, let me give an example top of my mind. Obviously, you are an expert and you could give more. But, like, for example, one person may value, I don't know, a good program at an esteemed organization, or other may value coupon for dinner or something, and yet other may value a plaque or something. So we have to start thinking in those terms.
Right. So then once we know that what they want, and then how do you communicate it once, when you know and you are sure about what your employees understand, that the company is responsive and being able to fulfill their requirements?
So it is important to remember, Sushmita, that, as a company, you'll probably not be able to fulfill all their requirements. What you need to make sure is your employees understand what company is offering, and that you are making a constant endeavor to keep up with their requirements based on the resources you have. Now, I go back to the research because obviously I love referring back to it. So the high performing organizations, make employee communications a priority. It is as important as customer communication. There are a lot of frameworks that you can draw on from marketing or HR, but I like to keep it simple. So there are few things that I believe work well, and let me share that with you and our listeners if it is helpful.
Yeah, sure.
First being clear and concise. Just make sure your message is received in the way it is intended. No ambiguous and secondary messages should be clumsily clubbed together. Clear and concise. Second, and probably the most important, start at the top. Your CEO and CHRO and other senior leaders need to set the tone.
Right.
Thirdly, going back to our friends in marketing, make sure that your employees hear, see, experience message multiple times, multiple ways to understand it completely. Get creative, have fun with it, but just stay true and consistent to your messaging. It should reflect who your organization is.
Right.
Fourth comes to discipline. Have a calendar, be regular, systematic, and strategic. And finally, as a rewards person, I believe in numbers. Measure effectiveness. Check formally and informally, regularly, and be humble that we could have communicated it differently, we could have done it more or less, and make those changes. It's all right. We are all learning.
Right. So according to you, Charu, what's the most effective way of rewarding top performers?
Sushmita, top performers are a tale as old as time, and rewarding them somehow remains still the hot topic, simply because they are your most important people.
Right.
But the principle still remains the same. Just don't have a community approach. Make sure it is exclusive, timely, public, and genuine. And going back to our initial discussion, if possible, wherever possible, personalize it. I believe, and I've said it before, we can really learn from marketing. These are our top customers and we have to serve them well.
So when we talk about additional benefits, our listeners will know that we have our own products, Vantage Rewards, which is an easy to use and customizable cloud-based solution. Again, we have Vantage Fit that has been revolutionizing employee wellness journeys around the globe. So according to you, what additional benefits can you give to build a better workplace apart from pay?
Yes, Sushmita, I'm aware that Vantage is doing some fantastic work in the arena and I've been reading up, and that's why it's such a pleasure to talk to you today. So do feel free to go out and research and find out for yourself what Vantage is all about. I will talk more in terms of, again, going back to the basics rather than products, because products are there in the market once you decide your approach. As I spoke about the research earlier, there is a consistency in it that non-monetary rewards are more critical than ever. So let's talk about the few that, in my opinion, are the most important. One is learning and development opportunities. Especially for millennials, they are young, they're in a hyper-competitive environment, and in a world that changes really, really fast, as we are all experiencing currently. So these opportunities could be many, like continued education programs or cross-geography assignments or deputations or fast-track programs, etc. But there has to be learning and development opportunities focus.
Okay.
Second, what our current modern lifestyle has brought to the fore in our personal life comes to our workplace as well, is health and well-being.
Right.
So here we are talking about not just, physical fitness and overall health, but also mental health, which has become a huge topic now. Flexible working, importance of allowing people to take care of your family time and parental friendly policies, etc. And finally, I come back to it, the last, but probably the most important is recognition. And again, these I talk about a lot because these are very critical and probably a low hanging fruit. They are easier to do than everything else. Have customized programs for recognition. Recognize your employees for their contribution, but make it meaningful, tailored to individual needs.
Okay, so for any recognition or rewards program to be effective, it should meet several criteria. How can you say if your reward system is successful?
Like anything else, I mean, you can only know if something is successful by experiencing it. You can know you made a good cake only by eating it, right? I mean, maybe I should not talk about cake, but a curry probably. So we have to measure it. There's no other way. And we have to measure it from right sources. It has to show up in various KPIs and feedback forums. So some of my favorites actually are retention rate, engagement score, ENPS. ENPS is actually borrowed from sales and marketing, where you are talking about employee promoter scores. So whether they advocate for your organization. And finally, the old one is absenteeism rates.
Okay, so now if we talk about the current trends, what are the trends and how much do companies invest in rewards and recognition in India and abroad?
Obviously, it's a bit of a larger question and really depends on what your purpose is when it comes to rewards and recognition. So it varies. It really varies. For example, if you are in an environment where employee churn is a huge concern for you, then anything you spend on rewards and recognition, which helps you retain employees, which is lesser than cost of replacing an employee. And cost of replacing an employee is just not about recruitment. It's also training and the time the employer will take to come up to the job, right? So if you spend anything less than that cost, that's something you'll be willing to spend. But if you look at rough figures and go by again the research, then the best companies globally spend around $250 to $300 per employee.
Okay.
This value comes in a bit lower for smaller and medium-sized organizations, but a rough estimate would lend us somewhere around $150 to $200.
Okay.
India historically was lower because obviously our pay and our employee practices were still evolving. However, now we have reached a stage where we are very close to the global average.
Okay, great. So any suggestions for our listeners, Charu?
Okay, so there are many things that we've spoken about during this podcast. But if you were to take away one thing as a fellow HR professional, there's just one advice I have. Move away from best practice. Move away from best practice and start thinking in terms of best way. We just benchmark just way too much. So let's start building, reflect on our organization, seek feedback from our employees, look at formal and informal signs and suggestions, and then start small. You don't have to commit to anything. Just do a bit of pilots, sort of MVPs, see if they work, and then go for launch. Let's not be afraid to try and fail. Just look at something which is unique to our organization if we really want the competitive advantage. Second thing I would say, and borrowing again from marketing, is that like marketing moved away from product offering to customer centricity, let's start moving away from HR offerings to relationships with our employees. So let's not think what we are offering to our employees, but start thinking what an employee values most. And then we'll develop much better proposals, programs, and practices. And finally, just don't fall in love with your rewards. Just don't fall in love with HR programs. Employees don't. We are in an era where things are dynamic, changing fast, and we should stay agile. We have a great policy today, but within a year, it may just be a burden. Let's accept it and let's just move forward from it. You remember a time when we used to have this policy where, you would have BlackBerry at certain level and above, and this was a huge policy and every organization wanted to launch it.
Yeah.
Today, it looks like really meaningless, doesn't it?
Right. Okay, really nicely explained, Charu. So, how can our listeners reach out to you?
I'm there. I mean, as you are aware, I work a lot as an advisor to startups, young startups. So I love listening from fellow HR professionals and people. I'm there on LinkedIn, very easy to reach. Just, give me a shout out, provide a reference to this podcast, and I'm happy to respond to you.
Okay, great. So that was an awesome conversation with you, Charu. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Sushmita, for the opportunity. I loved it.
Sure.
Thanks for listening to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast, where we engage with HR influencers about human resources. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for new episodes.